and welcome to the Sunday Guardian show by Joyeeta Basu. Now that the US presidential election result is out and January, Donald Trump is supposed to be sworn in as president, what exactly does the future hold? First of all, there was a lot of apprehension about which way the election would go. How did Mr. Trump achieve this victory? To discuss all this, we have two very special guests with me here, Captain James Fanell and Bradley Thayer. They are the co-authors of the book called Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. They're really an expert on China and US. So I hope to ask some questions to them about US and China under President Trump. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming to the show.
And thank you. It's our pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you.
First of all, you have been writing for the Sunday Guardian, and you have expressed some apprehensions about, which way the election would go. So how did things change? How did this victory come about? Bradley, if you can start.
Well, certainly. It's a pleasure to join you, and thank you for having us on again. The victory came about because of the profound support that Donald Trump has among the American people, as evinced in the fact that he won the popular vote of well over 70 million Americans, in contrast to about 66 million that thus far Kamala Harris has won. Now, this is remarkable because Republicans traditionally lose the popular vote. But here we have a Republican presidential candidate, the first since George W. Bush in 2004, in the wake of 9/11, the first presidential election in the wake of 9/11, to win the popular vote. So that is strong empirical evidence that people, no matter their race, no matter their class, no matter their background, no matter their education, are voting for and supporting President-elect Trump, in contrast to Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris underperformed in every traditional Democratic category, with the exception of Black women, where she did roughly equivalent. But in all of the major, if you will, elements of the Democratic coalition, she underperformed. And that's strong evidence, of course, that she had profound liabilities as a candidate, and Trump had great strengths as a candidate in contrast. So in order to understand it, we need to understand that he strongly connected with the American people in a way that no one else did. And that largely accounts for his spectacular victory yesterday.
Captain Fanell, the thing is, what exactly, in your assessment, what went right for Trump? As Bradley said, which is kind of, he connected with the people. Why is it that Kamala Harris couldn't connect and Trump did?
Well, I think, first of all, thanks for having us on. It's a great honor. We're very happy to be able to speak with you tonight and to talk with our friends in India and about these issues that are very important to India's national security, our own American national security, and I think the global national security. I think in terms of what happened, well, in the first part, there is some culpability from the American and Western media and their poll workers and the poll companies, the companies that run these polls. And it was very clear when you go back and you look at the results from 2012, 2016, 2020, and 2024, that the Democrat Party was averaging, at least in 2012, 2016, and 2024, 65 or just over 65 million votes. And then they had this one outlier in 2020 when Joe Biden won, where he had over 80 million votes, the most that it's ever been recorded for any presidential candidate. But on the average, previous elections were all around 60 to 65 million. And Trump in 2020 had over 70 million, close to 75 million. And then this time, he says, Brad mentioned, we had 71 million. So there's something that was going on in terms of the accuracy of the poll data, There was some reporting that the polls were this year in 2024 only had 1% turnout, whereas in previous polls you had 8, 9, maybe 12% turnout. So the accuracy of the polls was not there. So in other words, what people were hearing was that the week before the race or the election day, that everything was equal. But in reality, as we saw last night, things were not equal. This blue wall, Trump blew through the blue wall, winning by 4 or 5% in all of those key, supposedly battleground states. So I think we have to be very careful about this perceptions of what we think was supposed to happen when it actually what had happened. And the reason for that is what Brad mentioned, is that Trump was able to build a broad coalition. His what he stood for was valued based or judged based on his performance in his first term compared to the performance of Kamala Harris and Biden in their 4 years. And things were much worse. And so it didn't matter, as Brad and I like to say, it doesn't matter what your color of your skin is or who you are or what gender you are. You are an American, and American issues are based upon basic values of, hey, can I feed myself? Can I feed my family? Am I being treated fairly, or am I being treated against some DEI values that say, no, you don't get a fair shake based upon your background? So the American values were the things that really came through this time. And for us, it's very positive to see that we've returned back, at least in this election day, to American values of freedom, liberty, meritocracy, colorblindness, and those kind of values. And I think that's really the lesson.
Yeah, okay, Brad. Now, when we're talking about values, and of course, because you see, after all, Kamala Harris also got 66 million people voting for her. Now, going forward, and given that kind of atmosphere we have seen in the past 4 years, with a lot of toxicity that has come into, which required the need to regain those values, how successful do you think will Trump be to bringing America back on track?
I think he'll be supremely successful in a way that even exceeds his first term or the term of any modern American president. Because although Trump faces a cornucopia of difficulties, those are going to be fiscal difficulties, those are going to be immediate economic difficulties that he faces. When he comes into office, there are going to be additional, and there could be international crises as well by the time he comes into office. Trump has the grand strategy, if you will, that allows him to identify what must be done in the economic realm, in the fiscal realm, in the international realm, and with domestic policy as well. There's an old adage that nothing succeeds like success, right? And that if you are going to have a robust economy, you're going to have broadly, of course, far more popular support for it, as we saw in Trump's first term. He did not engage in international wars during that time, which was very popular with the American people. He had the domestic house in order. Fiscal house was getting in order. Very challenging issue, but nonetheless was moving in that direction. And he did that while he was facing the slings and arrows of lawfare, impeachment, individuals within his administration who stabbed him in the back and betrayed him. So the Trump administration, the second Trump administration, is going to be a far more efficient operation. It's going to be a far more directed operation that is able to execute the grand strategy of Donald Trump. And that bodes very well for partners like India in the common threat that we face from the Chinese Communist Party and other threats that we face globally. Also, key treaty partners like the Philippines and Japan are going to be robustly strengthened by Donald Trump. The war in Ukraine, he's going to put enormous emphasis on ending that conflict and doing his utmost to draw Russia, although Russia will never be an ally of the United States, away from being essentially the subordinate to Xi Jinping, which is the situation Putin has gotten himself into presently. So I think you will see a very dynamic, a very active Trump second term, to the great benefit of the globe broadly. Modi, of course, has an excellent relationship with him. And I think that that is going to help facilitate great deals of further cooperation between key partners, India, New Delhi, and Washington.
James, now when we are looking at specifically in the Pacific and China, how do you think will Trump's policy be different from what Biden's policy has been? And is China wary about President Trump much more than they were about Joe Biden?
Well, first of all, I agree with what Brad just said in terms of the success that I anticipate that Trump will have in his second administration. With regard to the Indo-Pacific, there's no question that there will be now a resurgence of relations with India, much closer, much more honest, free-speaking dialogue between the two leaders and their various elements of the government. You'll see much more openness and willingness for America to cooperate with India, not just in naval arena, but in the border issues, and to help India defend themselves against the threat that China poses to India from that northern border. And also, I think there's going to be a blossoming of economic relationship between India and America that will help America move some of our big companies out of China. We need to decouple, as Brad and I argue in our book. We need to decouple America's economy from the Chinese Communist Party and their talons that have hooks into our major corporations like Apple and General Electric and some of these other major Ford and other things like that. So I think you're going to see a shift towards America recognizing that India is a much safer partner because we're both democracies. And then in terms of the military arena, I think you're going to see a blossoming of cooperation on defense issues in terms of weapon systems that we can share and work together, cooperation in not just holding, Quad events, but to actually mature the Quad, operationalize the Quad, moving the Quad into a much more tactically relevant and capable system that was occurring during the first Trump administration and has kind of just been simmering under the Biden administration. And I think, to answer your last part of your question, China's been very concerned about this. They've been keeping a very low profile, playing it very cool before the election. But today, if you go through the Chinese press, it's very clear that they are very wary now of a Trump administration, and they're trying to put this, they're trying to kind of tie Trump's hands ahead of time by saying, hey, any new administration, Trump administration, will have to follow the same kinds of patterns of engagement that occurred under the Biden administration with their neo-engagement strategy that we saw unleash in May of 2023. And we saw all these cabinet level officials just going to China and Beijing and kissing the ring, if you will, of the Chinese emperor. And so I think you're going to see that change. And I think you're going to see a much more hard line against Beijing economically, militarily, diplomatically, and in the information arena and with our alliances. So China's not going to be happy about this. It doesn't mean that Trump's going to start a war, but he's definitely going to hold a line that had been eroding under the Biden administration and get back to real power relationships. And we're happy about this because it means that we'll have a chance to check the aggression of the Chinese Communist Party that's threatening war, not just with Taiwan, not just with Japan, not just with the Philippines, but obviously on the border of India.
Yes. Brad, now this talk about the war brings me to the issue of Taiwan. How serious is Trump about defending Taiwan in case there is some kind of an attack? And you see, there is actual talk in terms of Taiwan itself is speaking in terms of China may be attacking it in 2025. They even have given a timeline. Do you think Trump's election has pushed that timeline back? And what is exactly, as I asked, Trump's response if Taiwan gets into trouble? What is Trump's response likely to be?
I think that Trump will have an excellent relationship with Taiwan, and that Trump will do what is necessary in every respect to ensure that Taiwan has a conventional deterrent to deal with the hyper-aggression of the Chinese Communist Party, which is directed, of course, at U.S. treaty allies like Japan and the Philippines and partners like India and Taiwan. So I expect that Trump will have a very active period where he's moving to ensure that Taiwan has what it needs, that U.S. allies and partners, in conjunction with the United States and ultimately the American strategic deterrent, have a very active role to play in defending Taiwan from, again, the CCP's hyperaggression. There are many cooperative steps that can be taken to ensure that each day Xi Jinping decides today is not the day to attack Taiwan, right? And to ensure that whether it's a hedgehog strategy or whether there are other elements that could be taken in place to increase the costs to the CCP's aggression, I think that those measures will be put into place very rapidly in conjunction with our treaty allies and partners in the region. The CCP has profound vulnerabilities. And the greatest vulnerability that the CCP has is the existence of Taiwan, which is actually the legitimate government of China. And so having Trump identify themes that play to political warfare, as well as the key aspects of kinetic war, what's necessary for deterrence of a conventional attack or a nuclear attack, is absolutely essential. So I think you will see a basket, a very creative basket or tranches of measures that Trump will take to ensure that the CCP remains deterred. But we would also stress that, again, there's a window of opportunity. Trump is not yet president. And as you said, 2025, many estimates have come together, and Jim has written on this for many, many, many years. Jim Fanell has been calling attention to this danger for over a decade now, that it is a very precarious situation, and deterrence has to be as closely guarded and nurtured as we did on the Central Front in Europe. Between NATO and the Warsaw Pact, right, where we put enormous emphasis on conventional deterrence, on nuclear deterrence, and the conventional nuclear interface in that environment. So there's much to be done, and I think Trump is going to do it with dispatch.
James, I have got a question about, we talked about NATO. I mean, I'm told the NATO countries are already very worried what exactly Trump will be asking from them. And do you think he's going to moderate his position? Because last time we did hear things, what he said about NATO. So do you think he's going to moderate his position on NATO? What is he going to expect from them?
Well, again, as I said in my first answer, I think a lot of times the questions and the perceptions that we have are based upon a narrative that comes from a media that tells us certain things. So, for instance, your question has this undercurrent that Trump is against NATO. But in fact,
yes, that's what we have been told.
Yeah, I know. And that's what you've been told. And I would submit that we have to look at actually what occurred during his first administration. NATO was strengthened. And I have a list of about 17 items that Trump did to strengthen NATO during his first term that never occurred before. For instance, for the first time ever, we took an aircraft carrier air wing and we sent it to do operations in the Baltic. That had never occurred before. We took Marines that were U.S. Marine Corps troops that were in Norway, and we sent them to work in Finland. That had never occurred before. We installed Aegis ashore in Romania, air defense systems. We increased the European Defense Initiative by 8 or 9 times the amount, from like 800,000 to almost 9 million when Trump was in office. And there's a whole list of things that occurred. But what people focused on was what the media told them, which was, oh, Trump said some harsh things about NATO because they weren't paying their fair share, which was their obligation that they had agreed to. So in all accounts, Trump was just calling out people for not following up what they signed up to do. He didn't abandon NATO. He strengthened NATO. and he actually prevented war in the Ukraine. And now, what is the result of somebody who's popular and told that they're for NATO? They're much nicer, they're better people. Biden was considered to be a better, more moral president because he was for NATO, right? That was what we were told in the popular narrative. But you know what's happened in the last 4 years? Over 1 million humans have died in Ukraine and Russia. How many people died in Russia and Ukraine when Trump was president? Not one person, but 1 million humans have perished from this earth because of Joe Biden and his policies. So I get a little frustrated when we accept the media narrative of Trump did this or Trump did that. No, let's look at facts. Let's look at the facts of what actually occurred. And just because you don't like the way somebody speaks does not mean that they're evil. Because we saw in this last month, Kamala Harris said Donald Trump was Hitler and a fascist. Well, guess what? Over 71 million Americans yesterday just said, we don't think that's true. We think that you were exaggerating that, and we do not believe that he is a fascist. So I think we need to be very careful going forward about accepting media narratives, not from your media, but from the consensus media of the legacy establishment media. We need to be very careful.
Right. Now, Brad, I have a question about, when we are talking about the Russia-Ukraine war, Trump says he will be able to stop it. But today Putin has said that he is not intent on the war being stopped. He will continue exactly as it is possible, the way he has been going. Do you think it's possible for him to bring the two, Zelensky and Putin, on the negotiating table and kind of have to ensure that there is some kind of peace?
Absolutely, he's able to do that. There's no question that this war is a war of attrition. This is like two heavyweight boxers slugging it out, round after round after round. They've been bled and bloodied. As Jim said, so many casualties, so many hundreds of thousands of casualties, so much destruction, so much death, that it's in the sacrifice of their own national interest. Again, Putin is forfeiting his national security to Xi Jinping, of all people. So I think India has a key role to play here. I think that Trump's great relationship with Modi and Modi's great relationship with Putin, right, gives us an opportunity to advance the relationship between India and the United States, but also to work together cooperatively to end the war. Now, the war may not end in a peace treaty. It's not going to be Versailles. It could be an armistice. It could be, for example, what ended the Korean War, or it could be a frozen conflict, for example. But there is enough, given the enormous costs and the prospect that attritional warfare has a tendency to escalate in the history of conflict. And you see North Korean troops now, right? You see what we would call in international politics horizontal escalation, where other countries are coming in, they're contributing forces, and there's always the risk of vertical escalation, going from a conventional conflict to a tactical nuclear weapons use, or heaven forbid, any nuclear weapons use. So I think that the war will be ended by Trump. I think it's in the interests of Moscow and of Kyiv. And I think that this also offers an opportunity for democracies to work cooperatively, Delhi and Washington, as well as other democratic states, to ensure that the conflict is ended in a way that allows Ukraine to rebuild, that allows Russia to escape the grasp of Xi Jinping, that they got in through their own folly, but to allow them also to find a way away from the terrible tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party. So there's much that's going to happen there. I think Trump's first months are going to be a level of dynamism that is unmatched in American political history. I think that he is going to be accomplishing so much on a domestic front with respect to government spending and government policies, and also in international politics, and helping Taiwan, reassuring our allies and partners, and ending this war, this horrific war between Ukraine and Russia, are his priorities.
Yeah, James, here I wanted to ask about North Korea. In terms of the last time we saw Trump make some very unusual peace moves. So do you think he's going to restart that? Because somehow North Korea just disappeared from the discourse altogether in the last 4 years.
Well, it did leave the public discourse, but it was still there, as we know, because
Yeah.
they were conducting this missile test that they just did in the last week or two, ICBM, Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Test. So they're moving forward. Kim Jong-un has always had a penchant for raising international attention at critical times like this election. And I think what Donald Trump did in his first administration with setting a firm line that people thought was provocative and dangerous was actually turned out to allow them to come together and have 2 meetings internationally, and for Trump to actually be the first president in the history of the United States to actually walk across that border unguarded to meet Kim Jong-un and risk his own personal safety to demonstrate his willingness to try to make a deal to resolve these disputes and problems. So I think, like Brad said, Trump is going to make the war in the Ukraine stop. He will work to stop the conflict in Israel and Gaza and Lebanon, and to put Iran back in a bottle. And I think he's also going to be able to work with Kim Jong-un, who he's met now at least twice, and he's going to bring that back. The outlier to all of this is one man and one party. It's Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party of China. If the Chinese Communist Party and Xi, they are going to work overtime to continue to fan the flames of war in the Ukraine, in Israel, and to bring North Korea into this conflict. I've noticed over the last week, there's been several articles in America in leading American journals, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Bloomberg, and one in BBC, all analyzing this fact that North Korean combat troops, are fighting now with Russia. And they are now the consensus that's coming from Washington and London and other parts of the Western world is that, oh, well, this is something that Xi doesn't like and he's not really happy about. I disagree with that analysis. Brad and I disagree with that. That's not an indicator that Xi is upset about what Kim Jong-un is doing. He is promoting this behind the scenes. We don't have any public declarations, but clearly he is the funder and provider of all the resources of North Korea, their food, their money, their existence. And if Xi doesn't want him to do something, he would stop Kim Jong-un's troops from going to Russia. So he is in favor of this. And so this is the only challenge that Trump will have, and the rest of us will have, is to see how far Xi Jinping will go to achieve his plan, which is to make China the new center of a new world order. And to get to that new world order, what will he do to attack the United States and his allies, whether it's North Korea or in Israel or in Gaza or what's going on in the Ukraine and Russia? So I think that's a real challenge that Trump will have, is how aggressive will Xi be and how much force will he use, which brings us back to the original questions about what must be done. And that means we need to restore our national security and power.
Right. Now, one last question to both of you. While we are talking about, of course, you're talking about national security and power. Now, last time also we saw there was a lot of resistance from within to Trump's, from within the administration. How is he prepared to overcome that? Because after all, many of them are of Obama vintage and of course Biden and all. I mean, they may be resisting his policy. Brad, what is your feeling? I mean, what is your assessment of it? How Trump is going to overcome it? Then I'll come to you, James, with the same question. Yeah, Brad, please.
Certainly. I would just like to add one point, and that I think is that we should expect a flowering of the relationship between India and the United States like we have never witnessed before under Trump and Modi. Very importantly, with respect to this issue, it's supremely important supremely important because, as you observed, that Trump was, Trump's administration was at sixes and sevens with professional bureaucracy, if you will, or what might be called the deep state and others. Trump is aware of it. His team is aware of it and is working assiduously to bring about measures within the confines of federal employment law and federal billets, if you will, the rules and practices and norms in many respects that govern them, to bring about dramatic change in that workforce. So you will see the Trump administration bringing on Elon Musk and bringing on others from business to have creative ideas about what might be done, what could be done. And I would simply add, too, it's very important. The Republicans have the Senate. It seems that the Republicans will have the House of Representatives. So they will have control of Congress, which means legislation can be passed, which would be very helpful in the first few months of a Trump administration to accelerate changes in the federal workforce and to deal with individuals who might seek to sabotage, to undermine and thwart his policies, which is not the role, of course, of government service.
Yeah, James, please.
Yeah, I think Brad has hit on it exactly. Personnel is policy, as they say in Washington. And so one of the first things that obviously will happen I think the first day will be every one of the appointments. There's some 3 to 4 million appointments 3 to 4,000, not million, appointments that a president has, of permanent appointments or appointments to the federal government. Those appointments that Biden and Harris made in their term, all those appointed personnel will receive their pink slips, and Trump will have his team that he will bring in. That did not occur in 2016. So just from a purely practical standpoint, he will have people in now that he didn't really have last time. This time he understands the permanent state, and that there were some people that said that they were with him, but they really weren't. So that will also be recognized. So there's a vetting of certain people that will be more attuned to, Trump is the one who is elected. The people that serve in the government are not elected. They're just civil servants, and they only serve at the pleasure of the President of the United States. So it's the pleasure of the president, whoever it is, to appoint who they like. And so those appointments are very important because they're the ones that effectively manage the federal state, which is in the millions, as I mentioned at the beginning. So I think we'll see that happen. And I think because time is so short in terms of Trump knows he only has this one term to get things done, and the fact of his own personality, which is he's a person that literally works around the clock. And in my time in the Navy, I've worked that way, and I've worked with many people like that. Trump will be somebody that will be pushing across all fronts 24/7 to affect these changes. And in terms of national security and our alliances and relationships with India, I think India should expect to see, as Brad said, a blossoming of our relationship that we haven't seen since Trump was last in office. And it'll make that first administration look very meager, as I think we're going to move forward much quicker.
Yeah, I mean, if I can make a comment, and the thing, when you're talking about blossoming of relationship, are you looking at specifically defense aspects, or you're also looking at trade and commerce and defense? When I'm talking about, of course, defense meaning defense, security, and technology, and also trade and commerce, or is it across the board? Brad and James, I mean, quickly. Please.
It's across the board. It's across the board. But it's rooted in not only the self-interest of India and the self-interest of the United States, which are important, of course, but it's also rooted in the personal relationship that Modi and Trump has, and the trust that they have together, and the fact that they're now once again both in office is going to allow that flowering, and that's going to, I think it will be the acme of U.S.-Indian relations in the history of our two countries.
Okay, and James?
Yeah, I agree exactly the same. And I would say that, in the Quad, was kind of resurrected when Trump came in. You had Prime Minister Abe in Japan, you had Prime Minister Modi in India, you had Trump, and then you had Prime Minister Scott Morrison in Australia. Morrison and Abe are gone. So the two remaining people that have this close relationship is Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. And as Brad said, I think you're going to see that personal relationship really integrate and push across the whole of government.
Well, I think we end on that, hopeful thought. We are hopeful that, yes, we are going to get back on track. Yes, there have been certain problems in India-US relationship under Mr. Biden. I mean, specifically about in the last few months, when I think, anyway, so the thing is, thank you for being on this show. I hope to catch up with you sometime later. And thank you, viewers, for watching. Until the next time.